He grabbed her by the back of the neck and slammed her head onto the table in front of a full diner. Not a shove, not a threat. A deliberate, violent act carried out in front of 40 people eating breakfast on a Tuesday morning. The dishes rattled. The room went silent. And every single person in that diner looked away. Every person, except one man sitting in the corner booth who had not touched his coffee in 11 minutes, whose German Shepherd had already risen to its feet before the sound of the impact had finished echoing off the walls. If you believe that no amount of money gives a man the right to put his hands on another person, subscribe to this channel right now and tell me in the comments what city you are watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Because what happened next in that diner is something nobody who was there that morning will ever forget for the rest of their lives. Hannah Rourke had been working the morning shift at Calvert's Diner for 3 years. She knew which tables tipped and which ones didn't. She knew which regulars wanted their coffee before they sat down, and which ones needed 2 full minutes to decide between the same 2 things they had ordered every week for years. She was 26 years old, and she was good at her job in the specific, quiet way that people are good at things they have decided to be reliable about, even when reliability does not get noticed or rewarded. She noticed Braden Whitlock the moment he walked in. Everyone always did. Braden Whitlock was 43 years old and had spent every one of those years being told that the rules that applied to other people did not fully apply to him. He owned the largest commercial property portfolio in Calvert County. His family name was on a building at the hospital and a wing at the high school, and a brass plaque outside the courthouse that nobody read anymore, but nobody had removed either. He walked into Calvert's Diner the way he walked into every room in this town, like the room had been waiting for him, and was relieved he had finally arrived. He sat at the center table without asking if it was available. It was not available. A family of 4 had been sitting there 20 minutes ago. Their jackets were still on the backs of the chairs. Hannah approached the table. "Mr. Whitlock, that table is actually being held for a family that stepped outside. I can get you something just as good right over here." Braden looked at the jackets on the chairs. Then he looked at Hannah. "Move them," he said. "Sir, those belong to paying customers who are coming back." "And I am a paying customer who is already here." He smiled the particular smile of a man who has never once had to raise his voice to get what he wanted. "Move them, sweetheart." Hannah removed the jackets from the chairs and carried them to the hostess station without another word. Her face stayed professionally composed. Her hands did not shake. 3 years of shifts had taught her how to hold herself together when she needed to, and she needed to now. She brought him a menu. He did not open it. "Eggs Benedict," he said. "And not like last time. The hollandaise was wrong. Tell the cook I want it right." "I'll pass that along," Hannah said. "I'm not asking you to pass it along. I'm asking you to make sure." Hannah wrote the order down and walked to the kitchen window without responding. Behind her, she heard Braden shift in his chair and say something to himself that was meant to be heard. She did not allow herself to react to it. In the corner booth, a man named Daniel Carter watched all of this without appearing to watch it. Daniel was 28 years old, though he looked older in the way that certain kinds of experience add years to a face without adding age. He had short, dark hair and the particular stillness of someone who has learned through necessity how to be very quiet in a room. He wore a plain gray jacket over a plain dark shirt, and he had been sitting in that corner booth since 7:45 with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and a plate of food he had eaten about half of without much interest. At his feet, a German Shepherd named Scout lay with his chin on his paws and his eyes moving slowly across the room. Scout wore no service vest, no identification. He was simply there, the way he was always simply there, pressed close to Daniel's leg, reading the room through the signals that Daniel's body sent, without Daniel being aware he was sending them. The diner was full. A Tuesday morning crowd, the kind that filled the booths with contractors heading to job sites and retired couples sharing sections of the newspaper, and young mothers trying to keep small children from upending glasses of orange juice. Hannah moved between all of them, with the efficiency of someone managing too many moving parts at once, which she was. 20 minutes after he sat down, Braden Whitlock's food arrived. Hannah set the plate in front of him carefully. She had checked it herself before carrying it out, the way she always checked orders for tables that required extra attention. Braden looked at it. He picked up his fork. He cut into the eggs, examined the hollandaise with a concentration of someone looking for a reason, and then set the fork back down. "This is wrong," he said. "I'm sorry to hear that," Hannah said. "What specifically can I have corrected for you?" "The hollandaise. It's wrong. Can you tell me how you'd like it adjusted? Temperature? Consistency?" "I just told you it's wrong." His voice had not risen. It carried instead the particular edge of a man who is choosing his words carefully, because he enjoys what comes after the choosing. "Are you not able to understand that?" "I understand you're not satisfied, sir. I want to fix it." "Then fix it," Braden said, "and be faster about it than you were the first time." Hannah reached for the plate, and that was when it happened. She is not entirely sure, afterward, how her hand caught the edge of the glass. Whether it was the angle or the movement, or simply the accumulated pressure of the last 20 minutes translating into one unguarded second. The water glass tipped. The water went across the table and caught the edge of Braden Whitlock's jacket sleeve. The sound Braden made was not loud. It was very quiet, actually, which was worse. "You did that on purpose," he said. "I absolutely did not." "I am so sorry. Let me get something to clean that." She turned toward the nearest station for napkins. Braden's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist before she had taken 2 steps. Hannah stopped. Her whole body went rigid. "Look at me," he said. She turned back toward him slowly. His grip on her wrist was not painful, but it was deliberate in a way that communicated very clearly that pain was available at his discretion. "Do you know what this jacket cost?" he said. "Sir, please let go of my arm." "Do you know?" "Please let go." Braden released her wrist. For half a second, Hannah thought it was over, that the moment had passed, that she could go get the napkins and manage the rest of this interaction the way she had managed 100 others like it, with patience and professionalism, and the specific kind of internal silence that gets a person through a shift. Then his hand came up and slammed the back of her head down onto the table. The impact was hard enough that the silverware jumped. Hannah's vision went white for a moment at the edges. Her palms caught the table, and she held herself up by the pure physical reflex of someone who has been trained since childhood to stay on her feet. The diner went completely silent. 40 people, and not one of them made a sound. Braden sat back in his chair and adjusted his jacket sleeve with the calm deliberateness of a man who has done something he considers entirely reasonable. "Now clean it up," he said. Hannah straightened. Her hands were pressed flat on the table. The back of her head was ringing, and her ears felt strange, and she was working very hard not to let any of what she was feeling cross her face, because if she let it cross her face, she would not be able to stop what came after it. "Someone call the police," she said. Her voice came out steady. She surprised herself with how steady it was. Nobody moved. She looked around the room. 40 people, regulars she knew by name, people who had eaten her food and left her tips and asked about her weekend for 3 years. And not one of them reached for a phone. Braden laughed. It was a short, satisfied sound. "Nobody is calling anyone," he said. "Sit down, you're making a scene." In the corner booth, Scout was already on his feet. Daniel Carter had not moved yet. He was watching Hannah's hands on the table, and the way she was holding herself upright, and the specific quality of the silence that had filled the room. And he was running through something in his mind that took about 4 seconds to complete. He had seen that particular quality of silence before. In rooms where authority had decided that certain things were allowed to happen because the person they were happening to did not have enough power to make them stop. He had sat in those rooms before. He had been part of that silence before. And it was the thing he was least proud of from any chapter of his life. He slid out of the booth. Scout moved with him, no command needed, matching his pace exactly. The dog's shoulder brushing the side of his leg as they crossed the floor of the diner toward the center table. Braden saw them coming. His expression did not change immediately. He registered Daniel the way wealthy men register things that have not yet proven themselves relevant, which is to say, he registered him as probably not relevant. Daniel stopped at the edge of the table. He looked at Hannah first. "Are you hurt?" Hannah looked at him. She was trying to figure out who he was. She did not know him. He was not a regular. His face was completely calm in a way that, under the circumstances, was either reassuring or alarming, and she could not yet tell which. "I'm fine," she said, which was not true, but it was what she said. Daniel looked at Braden. "You need to leave," Daniel said. His voice was level and quiet and held no particular emotion. It was the voice of someone stating a fact about the weather. Braden stared at him for a moment. Then the smile returned. "I need to leave," Braden repeated slowly, as if testing the sentence for structural flaws. "I need to leave." He leaned back in his chair and looked Daniel up and down. "And who exactly are you?" "Someone who just watched you assault a woman in front of 40 witnesses," Daniel said. "And who is going to stand here until you walk out that door?" "Or what?" Braden said. Scout made a sound. Not a bark, not a growl. A single, low, resonant note that landed in the silence of the diner like a stone dropped into still water. Braden looked at the dog. The dog looked back at him with eyes that were perfectly calm and utterly without doubt. Braden looked back at Daniel. "You have no idea who I am," Braden said. "I know exactly who you are," Daniel said. "That's why I'm still talking instead of something else." The sentence landed in the room without explanation, and every person in that diner understood what the something else was, without needing it spelled out. Braden's smile did not disappear, but it changed shape in a way that meant something had shifted behind it, and not in a direction that was going to make the next several minutes easier for anyone. Braden Whitlock had not stood up yet. That was the thing Daniel noticed first. A man who was genuinely unafraid would have stood up by now. Braden was still in his chair, still wearing that rearranged smile, still performing the role of a man in complete control of the situation. But he had not stood up, and that gap between the performance and the action told Daniel everything he needed to know about what was actually happening behind Braden Whitlock's eyes. Scout had not moved either. The German Shepherd stood at Daniel's left side with his weight slightly forward, not aggressive, not lunging, just present in the specific way that trained dogs are present when they have assessed a situation and decided it has not yet resolved itself. The diner remained silent around them. Nobody had picked up a phone. Nobody had moved toward the door. 40 people, frozen in the particular paralysis of bystanders who want something to happen, but have not yet decided whether they are willing to be the ones to make it happen. Braden finally moved. He stood up slowly, taking his time with it, smoothing the front of his jacket with both hands. He was taller than Daniel by 2 inches, and he used those 2 inches the way he used most things available to him, as a tool. "You want to do this," Braden said. It was not a question. "In front of all these people." You already did something in front of all these people, Daniel said. I'm just responding to it. You're a nobody who walked into a diner and decided to make himself into something. Braden's voice carried a practiced contempt, the kind that gets refined over years of using it successfully. That dog doesn't scare me. You don't scare me. And when Sheriff Rourke gets here, which he will, because I am going to call him right now, you are going to find out very quickly what it costs to put yourself between me and my business. Call him, Daniel said. Braden blinked. That was not the response he had been expecting. People in this town, when they heard the sheriff's name attached to Braden Whitlock's business, typically recalibrated. They softened. They found compromises. They remembered that certain battles cost more than they were worth in a town where Braden Whitlock's family name was on half the buildings. Daniel had not recalibrated. Call him, Daniel said again, calmly. In fact, I'll wait. Braden pulled out his phone. He made the call without looking away from Daniel, which was itself a performance, the look of a man who can conduct two confrontations simultaneously. He spoke into the phone for less than 30 seconds. Short sentences, first-name basis, the easy shorthand of people who have a long-standing arrangement. He lowered the phone and slid it back into his pocket. 8 minutes, Braden said. Good, Daniel said. He pulled out the nearest chair from the empty table beside him and sat down. Scout circled once and lay at his feet. We'll be here. Hannah had not moved from the spot where she had been standing since Daniel crossed the room. She was watching the two men with an expression that was trying very hard to be unreadable, and not entirely succeeding. The back of her head still rang faintly. Her right hand was pressed against her apron, fingers working the fabric the way hands work something when the rest of the body is trying to stay still. One of the regulars, a retired man named Frank DeLuca, who had eaten breakfast at Calvert's every weekday for 11 years, cleared his throat from his booth near the window. Hannah, he said quietly, you okay? I'm fine, Frank, she said. You don't look fine. I said I'm fine. Frank looked at Braden. Then he looked at Daniel. Then he looked back down at his plate with the expression of a man conducting a private argument with himself about something he had not yet resolved. Braden had returned to his chair. He sat with one arm resting on the table, posture easy, performing patience. But his eyes moved to Daniel every few seconds in a way he could not quite stop. The involuntary attention that people pay to things they are pretending not to be concerned about. Daniel did not look back at him. He looked at Hannah. Sit down, he said quietly. You don't have to stand there. I'm working, Hannah said. Your shift can wait 8 minutes. Hannah looked around the diner, at the tables full of people who had watched what happened and said nothing. At the plates of food going cool and the coffee mugs sitting empty, because she had stopped making her rounds when her head hit the table. At Frank DeLuca, who was still conducting his private argument. At the young mother 2 booths down, who had turned her small daughter away from the room and was speaking to her in a low, steady voice about something else entirely. Hannah pulled out the chair across from Daniel and sat down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Scout lifted his head from the floor, looked at Hannah, and then set his chin back down. What's his name? Hannah asked, looking at the dog. Scout. How long have you had him? 4 years. Hannah nodded slowly. She was not really asking about the dog. She was asking questions because questions gave her something to do with her mouth, while the rest of her tried to process the last 15 minutes. You're not from here, she said. No. Where are you from? Different places, Daniel said. Most recently, Fort Campbell. Hannah looked at him more carefully. You were military. I was a police officer, Daniel said. Before that, yes. And now? Daniel considered the question. Now I'm drinking cold coffee in a diner in Calvert County, waiting for a sheriff I've never met to come tell me I made a mistake by not looking away." Hannah studied his face. "You think that's what's going to happen?" "I think it's what Braden Whitlock is expecting to happen," Daniel said. "Whether it's what actually happens is a different question." Across the room, Braden was watching this conversation with an expression that had tightened slightly at the corners. There was something about the way Daniel spoke, the flat, unhurried certainty of it, that was behaving differently than expected. Braden was accustomed to people who challenged him, doing so with emotion, anger or indignation, or the shaky righteousness of someone who knows they are outgunned, but cannot stop themselves from saying so. Daniel had none of that energy. He was simply sitting in a chair and talking to a waitress, and the absence of emotion was somehow more unsettling than the presence of it would have been. Braden stood up again. He walked toward Daniel's table and stopped 3 feet away. "You want to tell me what your name is?" Braden said. "Daniel Carter." "Daniel Carter." Braden repeated it slowly, as if running it through a database. "And what exactly do you think you've accomplished here today, Daniel Carter?" "I stopped you from putting your hands on her again," Daniel said. "That's the only thing I was trying to accomplish." "That woman spilled water on a $1,200 jacket." "She's a person," Daniel said. "Not a surface you're allowed to hit because you're unhappy." The sentence was so direct and so completely without drama that it landed harder than an insult would have. Braden stared at him for a full 3 seconds. Scout's ears moved forward slightly. "You think you're the hero of this story," Braden said. "I don't think about it in those terms," Daniel said. "I think a woman got hurt in front of a room full of people, and I was the only one who got up. That's not heroic. That's just the minimum." Frank DeLuca made a sound in his booth. Not quite a word, just a sound that meant something had landed somewhere it needed to land. Braden looked around the room sharply. The sound had cracked something in the performance he was maintaining, and he knew it, and the knowing of it made his jaw tighten. "You are going to regret today," Braden said. His voice had dropped. No more performance now, just the flat, factual delivery of a man who has made promises like this before and kept them. Not because of the sheriff, not because of anything that happens in the next 20 minutes, but because this town has a way of making sure that people who interfere in things that are not their business understand that it was a mistake. You understand me? Daniel looked up at him. His expression had not changed once since he sat down. "I understand that you're threatening me," Daniel said, "in front of witnesses, while the police are already on their way." He paused. "I want to make sure you've thought that through." Braden held the look for 3 more seconds. Then he turned and walked back to his table and sat down and did not speak again. The diner waited. 5 minutes passed, then 6. The only sounds were the grill behind the kitchen window and the low hum of the refrigeration unit and the occasional careful clink of someone shifting a coffee mug. The door opened at minute 8 exactly. Sheriff Caleb Rourke was a large man in a pressed uniform who walked with the practiced ease of someone who had been the authority in every room he entered for so long that he had stopped thinking about it consciously. He came through the door, and his eyes found Braden immediately. The instinctive alignment of 2 people who have been on the same side of things for a long time. "Braden," the sheriff said, a greeting more than anything else. "Caleb," Braden gestured toward Daniel's table. "That man walked across this diner and threatened me. I want him removed." Sheriff Rourke turned to look at Daniel. He took in the plain clothes, the calm posture, the German shepherd lying at his feet. His expression was not hostile. It was something more practiced than that. The professionally neutral face of a man who has already decided what happened before hearing anyone describe it. "Sir," the sheriff said to Daniel, I'm going to need you to step outside with me." Daniel did not move. "A woman was assaulted at that table 12 minutes ago," he said. "I watched it happen. I'd like to give you my account of it before we do anything else." The sheriff's professionally neutral expression did not change. "We can do that outside." "We can do it here," Daniel said, "where the 40 people who also witnessed it can hear what I say and confirm or correct it." The sheriff looked around the room slowly. At the regulars, at the construction workers, at Frank DeLuca, who had finally stopped looking at his plate and was looking directly at the sheriff instead. Something moved through the room in that moment, something that had not been there 8 minutes ago. It was not courage, exactly, not yet. But it was the thing that comes just before courage, the moment when enough people in a room look at each other and realize, quietly, that they are not as alone as they thought they were. Braden Whitlock felt it. His hand tightened on the edge of the table, and Sheriff Caleb Rourke, who had walked into Calvert's diner expecting a very simple conversation, understood for the first time that the next several minutes were not going to go the way he had planned them on the drive over. Sheriff Rourke stood in the middle of Calvert's diner and made a decision. Daniel could see it happen in real time, the slight shift in posture, the recalibration behind the eyes. The moment when a man who walked in with a plan realizes the plan requires adjustment. The sheriff pulled out the chair across from Daniel and sat down. He did not do it casually. He did it with the deliberate weight of someone buying himself 30 seconds to think. "Tell me what you saw," the sheriff said. Daniel told him. He did not editorialize. He did not raise his voice. He described the sequence of events in the order they occurred. The table, the water glass, the wrist, the impact, with the clean precision of someone who has been trained to document incidents accurately under pressure. He spoke for 90 seconds without stopping. When he finished, the sheriff was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Whitlock," the sheriff said, turning toward Braden's table, "you want to tell me your version?" Braden spread his hands in a gesture of exhausted reasonableness. "She dropped a full glass of water on a $1,200 jacket, Caleb. I reacted. It was a moment. Nobody got hurt." "She got hurt," Daniel said. "She stumbled," Braden said, not looking at Daniel. "She's clumsy. Ask anyone who works here." Hannah, who had not spoken since the sheriff arrived, made a sound. Not a word. Just a sound from somewhere low in her chest that carried 3 years of swallowed responses to things Braden Whitlock and men like him had said in rooms like this one. The sheriff looked at her. "Hannah, you want to tell me what happened?" Hannah looked at the sheriff. She had known Caleb Rourke for 6 years. She had voted for him. She had poured his coffee 2 Saturdays a month when he came in with his wife. She knew exactly what his relationship with Braden Whitlock was, because everyone in Calvert County knew. The same way everyone knew which roads flooded in heavy rain, and which families you did not cross, and which complaints filed at the county office had a way of disappearing before anyone followed up on them. "He grabbed my wrist," Hannah said, "and then he slammed the back of my head onto the table." She said it plainly. No dramatics, no tears. Just the facts laid flat on the table between them. The sheriff looked at Braden. Braden sighed. "Caleb, come on." "I'm going to need you to not say anything for a minute," the sheriff said. Braden's eyes sharpened. That was not the expected response. He leaned back slightly and recrossed his arms and said nothing. But the set of his jaw communicated volumes about what he thought of being told to be quiet by a man whose career he had supported through 4 consecutive elections. Frank DeLuca spoke from his booth. "I saw it." His voice was rough and not entirely steady, but it was present. "I've been sitting at this table since before it happened. He grabbed her wrist. Then he pushed her head down onto the table. It wasn't a stumble. It wasn't an accident." Frank paused. "I should have said something sooner. I didn't," but I'm saying it now." The room shifted. It was not a dramatic shift. Nobody stood up and started talking at once. But something that had been held at a specific tension released slightly, the way a rope releases when enough weight is added to the other end. Two of the construction workers near the back exchanged a look. The young mother turned back around in her booth for the first time since it happened. A woman near the window, who had been staring at her phone, put the phone face down on the table. Braden looked at Frank DeLuca with an expression that Frank DeLuca would remember for a long time. "Frank," Braden said quietly, "think carefully." "I have been thinking carefully," Frank said, "for the last 20 minutes. I've been sitting here thinking carefully while I should have been talking. I'm done doing it that way." Scout raised his head from the floor. The dog looked at Braden, then at Frank, then settled its chin back on its paws with the unhurried patience of an animal that has been through enough rooms to know when one is changing and when it is not. Sheriff Rourke stood up. He walked to Hannah's table and crouched slightly to look at the back of her head. He did not touch it. He just looked. "You need medical attention," he said. "I need someone to take a report," Hannah said. "I'm going to do both," the sheriff said. And something in his voice had changed from when he walked through the door. Something subtle enough that only the people paying very close attention would have caught it. But Daniel caught it, and Hannah caught it, and Braden Whitlock absolutely caught it. Braden stood up. "Caleb." His voice had dropped to the register he reserved for private conversations, the low, even tone that communicated that whatever came next was not for the room. "I need to talk to you. Outside. Right now." "Sit back down, Braden." The 4 words landed like something physical. The room went completely still. Nobody in Calvert County had heard Caleb Rourke speak to Braden Whitlock that way. Nobody had heard anyone speak to Braden Whitlock that way. Not a county official, not a business partner, not a man who understood what it cost to do so and did it anyway. The silence that followed was the specific silence of people witnessing something that they had stopped believing was possible. Braden did not sit back down. He stood very still instead, which was its own kind of answer. "You are making a mistake," Braden said. Quiet. Final. The voice of a man laying down something he will pick back up later. "Maybe," the sheriff said, "but I'm going to take a report from this woman, and I'm going to document what happened in this diner this morning, and then we're going to figure out what comes next." He looked at Braden steadily. "Now sit down or step outside. Those are your options." Braden chose a third option. He picked up his jacket from the chair, folded it over his arm with precise, unhurried movements, and walked toward the door of the diner without looking at anyone. At the door, he stopped. He did not turn around. He simply said, to the room in general, "Every person in here made a choice today. I'll remember it." Then he walked out. The door closed. For 2 full seconds, nobody breathed. Then the young mother in the corner booth said, quietly but distinctly, "Good riddance." And the construction worker nearest the back said, "Yeah." And Frank DeLuca picked up his coffee mug with a hand that was not entirely steady and took a long drink of something that had gone cold an hour ago. Daniel looked at Hannah. Hannah was looking at the door Braden had just walked through, and her expression was not relief. Not yet. Because 6 years of understanding how this town worked did not dissolve in 4 minutes, and she knew, with a certainty that sat in her stomach like something cold, that Braden Whitlock walking out of a room was not the same thing as Braden Whitlock being finished. "He meant that," she said quietly to Daniel. "When he said he'd remember, he meant it." "I know," Daniel said. "You're not from here. You don't understand what he can do." "I understand what men like him do," Daniel said. "I've seen it in departments, in courts, in towns a lot like this one. He looked at her directly. It doesn't always work the way it used to. Not anymore. Not when enough people in a room decide they're done letting it. Hannah looked at Frank DeLuca. Frank was still sitting in his booth, both hands around his mug, looking at the table. As if he felt her eyes on him, he looked up. And for a moment, the two of them just held each other's gaze across the diner. Two people who had been doing their routines in the same room for years without ever fully seeing each other. "I'm sorry it took me so long," Frank said. Hannah nodded once. She did not say it was fine, because it was not entirely fine. But she also understood that Frank DeLuca was 71 years old and had spent those years in a town that taught people to weigh the cost of speaking before they opened their mouths. She understood that kind of calculus. She had been doing it herself, every shift, for 3 years. "You said it," she told him. "That's what matters." The sheriff had pulled out a small notebook and was writing. He looked up at Daniel. "Fort Campbell, you said. You're law enforcement?" "Former," Daniel said. "I left the force 14 months ago." "Why?" Daniel considered the question the way he always considered it. The same way he had considered it 14 months ago, standing in a parking lot with his badge in his hand, knowing it was the last day he would carry it. "Because I watched a department decide that protecting certain people was more important than protecting everyone," he said. "And I was told that was how things worked, and I needed to get comfortable with it." He paused. "I didn't get comfortable with it." The sheriff looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked back down at his notebook. "I'm going to need contact information," the sheriff said. "And I'm going to need you to stay in the area for the next 48 hours, in case this goes further." "It's going to go further," Daniel said. "Braden Whitlock is not the kind of man who absorbs a loss in a public setting and walks away from it." "No," the sheriff agreed. "He is not." He said it without affect. The honest assessment of a man updating his own understanding of a situation he had previously been on the wrong side of. "Which is why I'm going to make sure the documentation from this morning is complete and filed before noon." Hannah looked at the sheriff. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You've known him for 20 years. Sheriff Rourke stopped writing. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because Frank DeLuca has been eating breakfast in this diner for 11 years. And he has never once in that time said a word about anything Braden did. And if today was the day Frank decided it was worth saying something, then I need to think hard about whether I've been letting the wrong things slide for too long." He closed the notebook. "That's the only answer I've got right now. It might not be good enough, but it's honest." It was at that exact moment that the door to Calvert's diner opened again. Not Braden, not a regular, not anyone Hannah recognized. A woman in a dark jacket stepped through the door and stopped just inside the entrance. She was around 40, with a particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who enter rooms professionally and assess them before deciding how to proceed. She looked at the sheriff, then at Daniel, then at Hannah. She reached into her jacket pocket and produced a credential wallet, holding it open toward the sheriff. "Special Agent Karen Hale," she said. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, Louisville Field Office." She looked around the room calmly. "I've been parked outside this diner for the last 22 minutes. I was here on a separate matter involving Braden Whitlock." She paused. "I have a recording of everything that happened inside this building this morning, and I think we need to talk." Nobody in the diner spoke for a full 3 seconds after Agent Karen Hale finished her introduction. Then Sheriff Rourke said, "How long did you say you've been parked outside?" 22 minutes, Hale said. "I arrived before the altercation occurred. I was already conducting surveillance on Braden Whitlock related to a federal investigation when he entered this diner." She looked around the room, with the measured calm of someone who has delivered information into difficult rooms before and knows how to wait for it to settle. I have audio and video from a device placed on my vehicle. The angle covers the front section of this diner through the window. It captured the incident at the center table in sufficient detail to be evidentiary. Hannah put both hands flat on the table in front of her. Not because she was about to stand up, because she needed something solid under her palms. "You were outside the whole time," she said. "Yes." "While he had his hand on my wrist." "Yes." Hale's voice did not flinch from the word. "I understand how that sounds. I need you to understand that entering the diner at that moment would have compromised an 18-month federal investigation into Braden Whitlock's financial operations, witness intimidation patterns, and his relationship with multiple local officials." She paused. "I made a call. I am not going to tell you it was easy." Hannah looked at her for a long moment. The look was not warm. "No," she said. "I don't imagine it was." Daniel had been watching Agent Hale since the moment she walked through the door, reading her the way he had learned to read people in rooms where the stated reason for being there and the actual reason were rarely the same thing. She was not performing. The tension she carried was real, the specific tension of someone who has spent a long time doing a job that requires them to hold two competing obligations at the same time, and has gotten very good at it without ever getting comfortable with it. "What's the investigation?" Daniel asked. Hale looked at him. "And you are?" "Daniel Carter, former law enforcement. I intervened in the incident this morning." "I know who you are," Hale said. "I watched you cross the room." Something moved briefly across her expression. "I want you to know that if you hadn't stood up when you did, I was going to have to make a different call." "What's the investigation?" Daniel asked again. Hale pulled a chair from the nearest empty table, turned it around, and sat down with the back of the chair against her chest, her arms folded over the top of it. The posture was deliberate, informal, designed to bring the temperature of the room down a degree or two before what came next. "Braden Whitlock has been under federal investigation for 22 months, she said. Fraud, primarily. Systematic misrepresentation of property values to secure financing, using shell companies to conceal the movement of those funds, and a pattern of using local political relationships to suppress complaints and investigations before they reached the county level." She looked at the sheriff with an expression that was not accusatory, but was also not gentle. "We have evidence of at least 4 instances in the last 8 years where complaints filed with the Calvert County Sheriff's Department involving Braden Whitlock were closed within 72 hours without documented investigation." The room was absolutely silent. Sheriff Rourke had gone very still. Not the stillness of guilt, or not only that. The stillness of a man who is hearing something he has been half aware of for a long time, finally stated aloud in a federal agent's vocabulary, which is a completely different experience from the version that lives in the back of your own head. "I need to know," Rourke said, his voice controlled, "what specific instances you're referring to." "We can have that conversation in detail," Hale said. "But not here and not now. Right now, I need to tell you what I need from this room, and then we need to move quickly, because Braden Whitlock is currently in his vehicle in the parking lot of the hardware store 2 blocks from here, and he has made 4 phone calls in the last 18 minutes. Frank DeLuca said, "Lord," under his breath. "He's not running," Daniel said. It was not a question. "No," Hale said. "He's not the type. He's calling people. Specifically, he has called his attorney, a county commissioner whose name I will share with the sheriff privately, and 2 individuals whose numbers we have flagged in connection with witness intimidation in previous cases." She looked at Hannah directly, which means my timeline just got shorter. Hannah absorbed this without expression. "He's going to come after the people who talked," she said. "He's going to try," Hale said. "Which is why I need formal statements from everyone in this room who witnessed the assault this morning. And I need them documented before he finishes those phone calls and gets his machinery moving." Frank DeLuca pushed back from his booth and stood up. He was 71 years old and moved with the careful deliberateness of a man whose joints had opinions about rapid movement. But he stood up. "Tell me where to sign," Frank said. Hale looked at him. "I need you to write down what you saw in as much detail as you can. Time, sequence, exact words if you remember them." "I remember them," Frank said. "I have been sitting here for 20 minutes replaying them in my head because I could not stop hearing them." The construction worker from the back table walked forward. Then the second one. The young mother stayed where she was, but she raised her hand slightly and said, "I saw it too. All of it." Something happened to Hannah's face in that moment that she did not try to control. It was not dramatic. It was small and private and very real. The particular expression of someone who has been alone with something for a long time and has just discovered, unexpectedly, that they were not as alone as they believed. Hale produced a tablet from her bag and began moving through the room with quiet efficiency, collecting statements, directing the process with a practiced economy of someone managing multiple things simultaneously. Daniel watched her work and felt the recognition of shared professional vocabulary, the specific way that experienced law enforcement moves through a room full of people who need to do something difficult and are more willing to do it than they think they are. Scout had moved to the center of the room at some point, not blocking anything, not positioned strategically, just present in the middle of all of it, tail moving slowly, the dog's steady attention drifting from person to person as each one sat down and began to write or speak their account. Hannah had not moved from her table. Daniel sat across from her. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I've been working in this diner for 3 years. I watched him come in and take whatever table he wanted and send food back because he felt like sending it back, and say things to me that I swallowed because the alternative was losing this job, and I needed this job." She looked at her hands. "I filed a complaint 14 months ago, after he grabbed my arm in the parking lot after a shift. I filed it with the sheriff's office." She paused. "It was closed in 3 days. No follow-up, no contact, just a form letter saying the matter had been reviewed and no action was warranted." Daniel looked at Sheriff Rourke, who was standing 6 feet away and had heard every word. The sheriff did not look away. "I know," Rourke said. He said it to Hannah, not to Daniel. "I know about the complaint. I signed the closure form." He stopped. "I'm not going to stand here and give you a reason for that. There isn't one that holds up." Hannah looked at him. "You've been coming in here for 6 years, she said. "You know my name. You know my order. You know I have a daughter in 2nd grade because I told you about her first day of school." Her voice was steady and very quiet. "You signed that form." "Yes," Rourke said. The word sat in the middle of the room by itself. It was the most honest thing anyone had said all morning, which made it also the most devastating. Hale appeared at Hannah's table. She set the tablet down and sat. "I need your statement," she said, "and I need to tell you something before you give it." She looked at Hannah carefully. "The assault this morning, what he did to you at that table, that is a standalone criminal charge that we can move on independent of the federal investigation, which means it can move faster, which means that today, this morning, depending on how your statement reads and what the recording shows, Braden Whitlock could be arrested before he finishes making those phone calls." Hannah went very still. Today, Hale confirmed. "He has never been arrested," Hannah said. "Not once. Not for anything." "I know," People in this town think he's untouchable. People in this town are about to find out something different, Hale said. But I need your statement. Detailed, specific, in your own words, starting from when he walked through that door. Hannah straightened in her chair. She put both hands flat on the table. She took one breath, slow and deliberate, the kind of breath that is also a decision. He came in at 8:43, she said. He sat at the center table without asking. The table was being held for another party. Hale's fingers moved on the tablet. Hannah did not stop talking for 11 minutes. She described every moment in sequence. The table, the order, the hollandaise, the glass, the wrist, the impact, the silence of the room, the 40 people who looked away. She described the scar on her wrist from 14 months ago that had never been in any official record because the complaint had been closed before anyone documented it. She described the 3 other incidents in the past 2 years that she had not reported because she already knew what reporting cost and what it did not produce. When she finished, the diner was as quiet as it had been when her head hit the table. Then Scout walked to Hannah's chair and placed his chin on her knee. She looked down at the dog. Her hand came down slowly and rested on the dog's head. She did not look up for a moment. When she did, her eyes were dry and her jaw was set, and she looked like someone who has finished carrying something the wrong way and has just figured out how it was supposed to be held. "What happens now?" she asked. Hale picked up her phone. "Now I make a call," she said, "and Braden Whitlock finds out that the hardware store parking lot was not as private as he thought it was." She stood up and walked toward the door, already dialing. Daniel watched her go and then looked at the room. Frank DeLuca was back in his booth with a second cup of coffee someone had quietly poured for him. The construction workers were still at their pushed-together tables. The young mother had her daughter on her lap now, the child unaware of everything that had happened, and therefore radiantly unconcerned about all of it. Sheriff Rourke walked to Daniel's table and stood there for a moment. "I want to ask you something," Rourke said. "Go ahead. When you walked across this room this morning, you didn't know who I was. You didn't know what Braden had on this department. You didn't know any of it." He paused. "You just got up." "Yes," Daniel said. "What made you sure it was the right call?" Daniel looked at Scout, who had returned to his side and was leaning warm and solid against his leg. "I wasn't sure," Daniel said. "I just knew that not getting up was wrong. And that's usually enough." Rourke nodded slowly. He picked up his radio. He looked at it for a moment. Then he clicked the call button and said, in a voice that carried the weight of a man choosing something costly and choosing it anyway, "Dispatch, this is Rourke. I need 2 units to the parking lot of Calvert Hardware on Main. We have a suspect I need brought in for questioning. The name is Whitlock, Braden Whitlock." The radio crackled. Outside, through the diner window, Agent Hale's car was already moving. The radio call went out at 9:41 in the morning. By 9:47, the first unit had pulled into the parking lot of Calvert Hardware on Main Street. By 9:52, Braden Whitlock was standing outside his vehicle with his attorney on the phone and his other hand held flat against the roof of his car. And the expression on his face was one that nobody in Calvert County had ever seen on him before. Not anger, not contempt. Something quieter and more fundamental than either of those things. The expression of a man who has just discovered, in real time, that the architecture he built his life inside was not as solid as he believed. Inside Calvert's diner, nobody knew any of this yet. They knew that Agent Hale had walked out. They knew that Sheriff Rourke had made a radio call that nobody in that room had expected to hear him make. They knew that the air in the diner felt different than it had an hour ago, charged in a way that was not yet relief and not yet certainty, but was something in between that had its own specific weight. Hannah was still at the table. She had not moved since finishing her statement. Her hands were in her lap, and she was looking at the surface of the table in front of her, with the focused inward attention of someone processing a large amount of information that arrived too fast to absorb in sequence. Daniel was across from her. He did not try to fill the silence. Scout lay between them with his chin on the floor, watching Hannah with the patient, unhurried attention that the dog brought to everything it decided mattered. Frank DeLuca spoke first. He did it from his booth, not walking over, just speaking across the room in the way that people speak when what they have to say does not require proximity to land correctly. "I want to say something to you, Hannah," Frank said. Hannah looked up. "I have eaten at this counter for 11 years, Frank said. "Twice a week, sometimes 3 times. I have watched that man walk in here and treat you in ways that I told myself were not my business. I told myself you could handle it. I told myself you would say something if it got bad enough. I told myself a lot of things that were easier to believe than the alternative." He stopped. "I was wrong, every time, and I am sorry." Hannah looked at him for a long moment. Frank DeLuca was not a man who said things he did not mean. She had known that for 3 years. Whatever his failures of action had been this morning, the words he was saying now were not performance. They were the real thing. "I know you are," she said quietly. "That's not enough," Frank said. "No," Hannah agreed, "but it's a start." The construction worker who had walked forward during the statement process, a man named Roy, who had been coming into Calvert's for 2 years and had never once introduced himself to Hannah by name, stood up from his table and walked to the counter. He picked up the coffee pot that had been sitting untouched since the morning broke open, and he poured a cup and set it on the counter in front of Hannah's usual working position. Then he looked at her. "I don't know what the right thing to do here is," Roy said, "but this seemed like something." Hannah almost laughed. She caught the edge of it before it came all the way out. "Thank you, Roy," she said. Roy blinked. "You know my name?" "I've known your name for 2 years," Hannah said. "Medium roast, 2 sugars, wheat toast, no butter, and you tip 17% regardless of the total. Every time." Roy stared at her. Then he sat down at the counter stool like someone whose legs had made a quiet decision. Daniel watched all of this and felt something settle in his chest that had not been settled in 14 months. Not peace exactly. Something more specific than peace. The feeling of being in the right room at the right moment for reasons that had nothing to do with planning. His phone vibrated. He looked at it. A text from an unsaved number with a Louisville area code. 3 words. She confirmed everything. He knew what it meant before he fully processed it. He put the phone face down on the table. Agent Hale came back through the door at 10:04. The room looked at her the way rooms look at people who are carrying news that has not yet been spoken. "Braden Whitlock is in custody," she said. She said it without theater. Just the fact, stated clearly, the way facts should be stated. He was taken into custody 12 minutes ago in the parking lot of Calvert Hardware. He is being transported to the county facility pending formal charges. The assault charge from this morning is the initial charge of record. There will be additional charges related to the federal investigation to follow. Nobody cheered. Nobody clapped. The response was quieter than that and more real. Frank DeLuca pressed both hands over his face for a moment and then pulled them away. The young mother exhaled through her nose and pulled her daughter a little closer. Roy turned his coffee mug in slow circles on the counter and stared at it. Hannah did not move at all. Hale walked to her table and sat. "I need you to hear something directly from me," she said. "The complaint you filed 14 months ago, the one that was closed in 3 days, We found it in our review of the department's records 6 months ago. It was one of 4 complaints involving Whitlock that were closed irregularly. Your complaint is part of the evidentiary record in the federal case." She met Hannah's eyes. "What happened to that complaint was not your failure. It was a system that was working against you, and the people inside it made choices that they are now going to have to account for." Hannah was quiet for a moment. "Is Sheriff Rourke going to be charged?" Hale was honest. "I don't know yet. That depends on what the investigation determines about his specific level of involvement versus willful negligence versus pressure from Whitlock's network. Those are different things, legally." She paused. "What I can tell you is that he made a radio call this morning that he did not have to make, and he made it in front of witnesses. That matters." "It matters," Hannah said, "but it doesn't undo 4 closed complaints and 3 years of Tuesday mornings." "No," Hale said, "it doesn't." The honesty of that landed cleanly. No attempt to smooth it over or reframe it into something more comfortable. Hannah respected that more than she would have respected reassurance. Sheriff Rourke had been standing near the door since the radio call. He had not approached Hannah's table. He understood, with the specific clarity that comes too late, but is genuine when it arrives, that approaching her was not his right at this moment. He had forfeited something this morning, not by making the radio call, but by the 14 months that came before it, and he understood that. So he stood near the door, and he waited, and he did not try to make himself feel better about it. Hannah looked at him across the room. He held the look without looking away. "I'm going to need to speak with someone from the department," she said, "about the formal process going forward, about what my rights are in this situation, about what remedies exist for a complaint that was improperly closed." "Yes," Rourke said, "you are entitled to all of that. I will make sure you have access to everything you need." "I don't want your assurance," Hannah said. "I want it in writing. Today." "Yes," he said again, without qualification, without negotiation. Daniel looked at Hannah when she said that. Something in her posture had changed from the woman who had been standing at the table with her head wringing and her hands pressed flat against the surface, trying not to show how badly she had been frightened. She was still the same person. The morning had not transformed her into someone new, but it had removed something that had been sitting on top of her for a long time, and without it, she stood differently, breathed differently, occupied the room differently. Hale stood up to leave. She stopped at Daniel's table. "Carter," she said. He looked up. "You know there are going to be people who say you shouldn't have intervened, that you escalated a situation, that you had no official standing." "I know," Daniel said. "There might be some legal review of your actions this morning as part of the documentation process." "I understand." "You're not worried about that?" "No," Daniel said. "Not particularly." Hale studied him for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" "You're going to anyway," he said. She almost smiled. "What are you doing in Calvert County? You drove through. You stopped for breakfast. You have no ties here that we can find." Daniel looked at Scout. The German shepherd was sitting up now, ears forward, watching the door with the alert patience of a dog that knows something is wrapping up, and the next thing is coming. "I've been trying to figure out what comes next," Daniel said. "Since I left the force. I've been moving around, looking at places, looking at situations, trying to understand what I'm supposed to be doing with the part of my life that's left." He paused. "I stopped here because the sign outside said the coffee was good." "Was it?" "It was cold by the time I got to it," he said. "But the morning turned out all right." Hale nodded once. She reached into her jacket pocket and produced a card. She set it on the table. "Louisville Field Office," she said. We have a task force working on local corruption networks in rural counties. The kind of work where it helps to have people who understand small towns and departments and how power operates in places where everyone knows everyone. She held his gaze. The kind of work where a man who got up and crossed a room because it was the right thing to do would fit in reasonably well. She walked out. Daniel looked at the card for a moment. Then he picked it up and turned it over in his hand. Roy refilled his own coffee from the pot on the counter. He looked at Daniel and said, with the direct economy of a man who does not typically say much, "You going to stay in town a while?" "Few days," Daniel said. "There's a decent motel on Route 9, Roy said. "Tell Margie at the front desk that Roy from the construction crew sent you. She'll give you the rate without the tourist markup." "Appreciate that," Daniel said. Frank DeLuca had put his coat on. He stopped at Hannah's table on his way out. He stood there for a moment without saying anything, which was itself something. Then he put his hand briefly on the edge of the table, not touching her, just the table, and said, "Thursday. I'll be back Thursday. Same time." "I'll have the coffee ready," Hannah said. Frank nodded and walked out. Hannah looked around the diner. The morning rush was long gone. The booths were empty now except for Roy at the counter and Daniel at his table. The cook had appeared in the kitchen window at some point and was watching everything with the quiet attention of a man who has heard the whole story through a wall and knows better than to insert himself into the last chapter of it. Hannah stood up. She straightened her apron. She picked up the coffee pot and carried it behind the counter where it belonged. She stood there for a moment with both hands resting on the counter and looked at the center table where Braden Whitlock had sat 3 hours ago with his $1,200 jacket and his absolute certainty that the world would continue to arrange itself around his convenience. The table was empty. The chair where he had sat was pushed slightly crooked. Hannah walked over and straightened it with one hand, the automatic reflex of someone who keeps a room in order. And then she stood back and looked at it. Just a table. Just a chair. Just a Tuesday morning in a diner in Calvert County that had started ordinary and would be talked about for years. Daniel put on his jacket. Scout rose immediately and moved to his left side, aligned and ready. The dog's presence as steady and certain as it had been since 6 in the morning. At the door, Daniel paused. He looked back at Hannah behind the counter. "You're going to be okay," he said. Hannah looked at him. The statement was simple and direct, and delivered without decoration, which was the only way she would have accepted it. "I know," she said. And the thing that made it real was that she meant it, not as reassurance, not as performance, but as the plain, hard-won truth of a woman who had walked through a fire that morning, that she had been circling for 3 years, and had come out the other side still standing, still clear-eyed, still exactly herself. Daniel walked out. Scout walked beside him, unhurried and proud, into the ordinary Tuesday morning that had become something else entirely. Inside Calvert's diner, Hannah Rourke picked up a clean cloth and began to work. The same hands, the same counter, the same diner. But Braden Whitlock was in the back of a county vehicle. Frank DeLuca had said he was coming back Thursday, and somewhere in an FBI field office, a recording was being logged into evidence that would spend the next 14 months dismantling everything a powerful man had spent decades building on the assumption that nobody would ever get up. One man had gotten up, and in Calvert County, nothing would ever be arranged quite the same way again.